as fast as I'd like, but still, it's getting there. Anyway, I lived in Coffs Harbour in 1948, and that's when I decided to learn to fly. And that was a branch of Newcastle Aero Club. And I started to fly in Tiger Moths and Avro 643s. And I got my PPL in Coffs Harbour. And then I transferred to Tamworth, where again it was Newcastle Aero Club, but they had a bigger, a permanent instructor there and more aircraft, so I could get more flying. And it was during this time, in 1950, Nancy Bird Walton got in touch with as many of the women flying as she could to join her in Bankstown in Sydney to form the Australian Women Pilots Association. And I hired an Oster in Tamworth and flew down. I picked up 2 other girls in Newcastle and we went to Bankstown and became foundation members of the Australian Women Pilots. That was in September 1950. There's only 4 of us still alive, but of which I'm one, of course. And anyway, I went for my commercial pilot's licence in Tamworth, and those days you had to do a correspondence course with the Department of Civil Aviation ran it, and you had to go to the capital city of your state every 3 months to sit for your exams. And so in early 1952 I'd done the necessary flying time, which was 175 hours, and I'd passed all my exams, and I was gained my commercial pilot's licence. Well, in those days there was no jobs offering for women. Any jobs that were available were snapped up by ex-RAF fellas who had the hours and the experience. So, but I was fortunate. My brother was working in New Guinea. He was with the Department of Agriculture, and he knew Bobby Gipps, and Bob was complaining about not being able to get pilots to go to New Guinea. And he said that most of the fellows that had flown up there during the war didn't want to go back there. Anyway, Greg told him about me, and he said, tell her to write to me, which I did. And so I was employed by Gipps Sepik Airways. I went to New Guinea in May 1952 and was told I'd land in Moresby, and I was told I was going to be second dickie on the Lodestar. I'd never seen a Lodestar before, and the only twin-engine endorsement I had was a Dragon. Anyway, we went out to the strip the next morning and they checked me out a bit on the Lodestar, and we took off for a trip to Popondetta. And we'd been airborne just a few minutes when the tower called us up and told us that there's black smoke pouring from our port motor and suggest we turn to Jackson's, which we did very promptly. And that aircraft never flew again. So much for the gentle female touch. It still could be parked down the end of Jackson's, I don't know. But it just never flew again. So you can flick over. Well, that's when I found KSK at Sanford, when Shane Winter had it. And again. And that's when I was in the Avro, when I was learning to fly. And again. Oh, that's KSK before it had the hail damage. It was up here at Yarraman. Again. Well, and that's the Norseman. The chief pilot said to me, well, you know, you're familiar with the Oster, you better do an endorsement on the Norseman. And which I did. And it looks quite small there, but if you go into the next, that's the typical passenger load standing under the wing of the Norseman. It looks much bigger there when they're standing under the wing. And the Norseman was a gentle, lovely aircraft. It was powered by a Pratt & Whitney 1340 with normal European seating, it carried 7, but with high density seating that we had in New Guinea, we could pack 14 into it. And their gear. So I did my endorsement on the Norseman, and one day I went out to the strip and they said, "Oh, you've got to fly the volcanologist out to Mount Lamington, the volcano that erupted in 1951. I said, "Oh yeah, okay." So away we went. And as we got close to it, he said, "Do you mind opening the windows, Pat? I want to get a good smell of it." And I don't know how close any of you have been to an active volcano. The stench, the sulphur stench is terrible. And he wanted to go round and round and have a good look down in the crater and a good smell of it. And eventually said, "Right, you can go home now." But so that was quite an experience. I'd been in QVAG about 3 weeks when Renus, the chief pilot, said to me, "Pat, I'm taking a Norseman through to QVAG to change it over to bring another one back for servicing. Do you want to come?" "Oh yes, please, lovely." I said, "How long will we be away?" He said, "Oh, about 3 days." So being a bit prudent, I packed for 5 days. And it's just as well I did, because I didn't get back to Moresby for 18 months. And the company eventually sent my gear through to me after 3 months. And welcome to the territory. That was life up there. Anyway, so we took off from Moresby and went to Goroka. You can go to the next one. Went to Goroka in the centre of the highlands there, and overnighted there, and I met the Gipps Sepik Airways staff there, and then on to QVAG the next day. And that was Friday the 13th of June 1952. And we landed at QVAG and I met the staff, including the manager, Toole, whom I later married. And anyway, Cole, seeing he had the extra Norseman there, he said, "Oh, can you do a trip to Angoram for me?" Angoram, just out on the Sepik here, and about 25 minutes flying from QVAG. And he wanted us to take 14 repats. The repats were natives that had been working on a copra plantation for 2 years, and they're being repatriated home, so they bought up all the goodies they could from trade stores, and we packed all 14 of them in and all the goodies, and took off. And 10 minutes later we had an engine failure, and Renus made a superb landing on a grassy ridge, and we didn't waste any time getting out in case of fire, grabbed the logbooks and out, and we had a door each. But all 14 of those repats and all their gear, they were out before we were, and last seen disappearing into the jungle. I wondered if any of them ever flew again. So we had no radio in our aircraft. None of the Gipps Sepik Airways ever had radio. It took up too much weight. You couldn't cut down on the payload too much. So Gibbsy wouldn't put any radio in them. Anyway, so we surveyed the situation. We thought, well, the aircraft's not damaged and clearly visible from the sky when somebody comes looking for us, and that we'd better start walking because we're going to have to walk home sometime, so it may as well be then. So we started walking, and we knew there was a mission station down on the coast at it was down here, a place called Tring, and we thought, well, we'll walk down there and see if the natives will take us back to QVAG by canoe. So we consulted with the father there, and he got the natives up, and they said, "Oh yes, yes, come on down." So we went down to the water, settled ourselves in the canoe, and went about 10 metres, and they said, "Everyone out, the sea's too rough, we can't take you." So we set off walking again. This time it was night, and the boy leading us with a hurricane lantern, I tried to convince myself, to hypnotise myself, that I wasn't walking, looking at this lamp and trying to... Anyway, didn't work. We got back into QVAG about 2 o'clock in the morning, and about 2 miles east of QVAG we struck a group of jeeps and a police boy, and he said that the search party had gone in on another track. We'd missed them in the night. So we borrowed one of the jeeps and told the police boy to go after them and tell them we were safe and home and all was well. So that was my first day in QVAG. And the next day the company in their wisdom decided to leave me in QVAG. That's why I didn't get back to Moresby for 18 months. So I started my familiarisation of the Sepik. And the other pilots, they were great. They respected me, and they once they knew I could fly, they were quite happy about me. And but none of them would alert me about what I could expect at any of the strips I went into. Most of the strips were one way, and the dress of the natives varied from place to place. Teleforeman right in the mountains, we could very rarely get into teleforeman's in there, and time after time you'd have to turn back because you just couldn't get in there. Anyway, the first day I was in there, I was with the chief pilot, Renus, and he touched down and he was more concerned looking at my face to see my reaction, because the men up there wore nothing except a polished gourd on their penises, and if they didn't have that they'd put a Colonos toothpaste carton or something such. Anything for blast. And at Marbrick they had a bark belt and there'd be a bank book stuck in that, and all these sort of things. There was another strip just west of QVAG, Hayfield, that it looked magnificent, wide, grassy strip. It was built in the Second World War, and I thought, this is good, you know, I'm in the Norseman, touchdown, bang, crash, wallop. You thought you'd broken the aircraft. There's Marsden matting under the grass, and it makes a hell of a racket when you touch down. Anyway, so I continued on with my familiarisation. At one stage, Peter Manser, the other pilot who was based in QVAG, had to fly Jim Dick, the CO of the PIR, the Pacific Island Regiment, which was based at Wanamo, up near the Dutch border. Wanamo, there's Wanamo. He was flying Jim back with a load on for the troops up there, and anyway, we got the frantic call from Wanamo that Peter had an accident. He'd managed to clip. You can turn it over again. Oh, that's a boyfriend of mine. He was always trying to cadge cigarettes from me. Again. There. Peter managed to clip a tree stump 18 inches out of the ground, 300 feet before the beginning of the strip, and flipped the Norseman over on its back. Now, Wanamo strip was only 1,300 feet long. It went across the isthmus, and the first 300 feet were US. And with the Norseman on its back in the middle of it, it doesn't leave you much room. And as the only other pilot in QVAG, I had to take the Oscar up and pick up the walking wounded, because both Peter and Jim had got battery acid in their eyes, because in the Norseman the batteries are under the pilot's seat. So it's a bit daunting when I got over Wanamo and saw that, and I thought, God, here we go. I had to side slip in alongside the Norseman and stand on everything before I hit the water the other end. And I thought, well, it's going to be a bit more difficult taking off because I've got 2 extra bodies on board. So the acting CO asked me what I wanted, and I said, well, I want the army fellas hanging onto the wing struts, and a few of them on the tail with the tail in the air, and wait till they had full throttle and the plane was really shaking, and not to let me go until I waved them away. And I just got airborne before the water at the end of the strip. So that was another experience. Anyway, I survived again. At one stage, the doctor in QVAG came down to the strip with some medication, and well, before I go on to that, the next photo, there's the Norseman with the three-bladed prop. Now this is when, after that first forced landing that Renus and I had in QVAG, there were 9 other engine failures in the Norsemans, and they found out that the engineering mob in Australia, who were doing the 1,000 hourlies, was following a wartime NOTAM that a particular screw could be taken up a half turn, and they just kept taking it up another half turn every time they did a 1,000 hourly on. So we had 9 engine failures, but fortunately we didn't lose any aircraft or any pilots. And ours, Renus and mine, was the only one where we had to walk home. The others all happened at airstrips. So Bob went to Australia to try and get new engines, and he bought these Wirraway ones. And they were brand new, they were still in the packing cases, and of course they had the three-bladed prop. So the Norseman was fitted with the Wirraway engines and the three-bladed prop, which did give us extra lift, but Bob came round and said, you know, no, you've got to be careful, it's going to be a bit nose heavy. If you've got to carry a shovel and a bag in the rear locker, and if you're coming home empty, you've got to fill it up with dirt or sand or something. I don't think any of us ever did that, but we carried it and Bob was happy. But it didn't make all that much difference. It was a tiny bit nose heavy, but you got used to it. Anyway, okay. And then Bob went to Europe and bought Junkers. Now, I didn't get to fly that, but anyway, he brought 2 of them out. But meanwhile, back at QVAG, the doctor came down one day with some urgent medicine for a young patrol officer who was at a remote strip. Oh, not a strip. He didn't have a serviceable strip where he was, and he was quite ill, and he needed this medication urgently. So we went into all the pros and cons of it, and I was to take the Oster out and drop the medicine to him. But we worked out that the Oster with a full load of fuel wasn't sufficient to get me home again. So I had a blitz can of fuel on the passenger seat, and I had to refuel the Oster in the air. So I took off on the belly tank, and when I changed over to the top tank, I hauled the blitz can over, put it across my lap, opened the door, opened the belly can, put the hose down and refueled the Oster. And that way I was able to get the medicine out to him, and he got it all right and he survived, and I got home. But the next hang on, excuse me a minute. A part of my duty at QVAG was to go through to Goroka once a week to pick up fresh vegetables. And QVAG in those days had 26 adults and about 23 kids. So the system was that they didn't sort of weigh anything in Goroka. They just filled the Oster up, put potatoes and heavy things in the back, and filled up everything. I might end up with a cabbage in my lap and a carrot in my ear. And anyway, one day they loaded me up so much I didn't think I was going to get over the Asaloka Gap to get out. I thought I'd have to put my foot out and push. Anyway, I made it, and it was all downhill from Goroka to back to QVAG. But that was just part of my regular duties. And then I had this. I was rostered on for this trip in the Oster to go from QVAG to Idapi to Wanamo, back to Idapi, and into Lumi, taking loads and reloading at each place. I'd done the first 3 legs, the QVAG, Idapi, Wanneroo back to Idapi, and I picked up a mission load for the Catholic mission in Lumi. And then of course I had to go in over the range. The first 3 legs of that were all along the coast. That was a piece of cake. So I got in over the range and I could see Lumi. There's just a little bit of scud around it, and then all of a sudden there was a complete whiteout. I have never seen one before or since, but it was complete. And you lose horizon, everything. And it's a bit panic-making. And I realised later that I had been upside down at one stage because I had oil on the windscreen. Anyway, I managed to start looking at my instruments and taking some notice of them. And I thought, well, all I can do is stay in the air as long as I could, watch the fuel, because there was just nowhere to put it down. And hope for a hole in the crowd. Well, I was getting very low on fuel when there was a hole down below me and a riverbed, and I thought, that will do me. So I spiralled down through the hole and landed in the riverbed. Next one. And there it is. On landing, those stones got bigger and bigger the closer I got. I wiped one leg off, started to nose over, sheared the prop, started to ground loop and splintered one wingtip. And anyway, leapt out. I was safe. I was okay.
That's KSK.
That's KSK. Yes, it is. That's why I'm so fond of it. Anyway, it's I was a smoker in those days, so I reached in the pocket for a cigarette, and I had a packet with 2 in it, and I thought, oh good, I'll have one now and one after dinner. I thought, stupid, what bloody dinner? Anyway, I was fossicking around in the load. The load was bags of salt, which are always wet and heavy in the tropics, and rolls of lap material for the trade stores. And in one corner I found a little package that had come from overseas, and it had a custom sticker on it, so it had the contents. And it was addressed to Father Mike in Lumi, and it had barley sugar and condensed milk. I said, thank you, Father. Tonight I eat. It was difficult trying to find stones sharp enough to punch holes in the condensed milk, but I eventually managed. Anyway, so the natives hadn't heard me come in. The river, the water was over to one side. It hadn't flooded at this stage. And so I got out a roll of lap white and rolled it out and spelt out help in dark stones in case there was a passing aircraft. But the weather was so stinking I didn't expect anything. Anyway, I spent that night in the Oster with the windows closed. It was like a sauna, and with the windows open the mosquitoes nearly carried me away. So it wasn't a very comfortable night. Mooching around, doing nothing the next day, nothing to do. And later I heard an aircraft, and they could only find me if they came from one direction, the north, because I was tucked in the corner of a bend of the river. Anyway, they came in the right direction, and it was the Dragon, air-mail Dragon from QVAG. And so great joy, you know, out there, where you are, you, I'm here, I'm all right. And they dropped a box to me, of course, on the other side of the river, which smashed on impact. Anyway, after they'd flown off, the water in the river was only about waist deep, so I waded across. And, okay, the box had broken out, but they had dropped me cans of water. And that was wonderful, because up till then, I wasn't game to drink the water in the river in case I got dysentery, because I realised that at some stage I'd have to walk out, and I didn't want to have dysentery. So I'd just been wetting my mouth and spitting it out up till then, so it was bliss to be able to open a tin and have a drink of water. Anyway, I got, and they'd decided I was a smoker, so they'd rounded up any cigarettes of the fellas on board and put them in an Ardagh tin which had a screw top, but that burst open too, and the cigarettes scattered around. And this was in the the pit, which is like a thin bamboo, which grows on the side of the river, and it was all wet. Anyway, I fossered around and found as many cigarettes as I could, and the water and everything, and I got it back to my side of the river. And there's a break in the weather, so I set out the cigarettes to try and dry on stones. And I thought, all right, that's great. I've been found, they know where I am. So there won't be any other aircraft around today. So being rather wet and still no natives around, I stripped off and put my clothes on the wing to try and dry out. Anyway, and settled down to have another drink of water. And some hours later, I heard another aircraft hurriedly, get out, try and get your clothes on. Get out, yes, I'm all right. And it was the drover, and they did a parachute drop to me. And of course that landed on the other side of the river. And so after they'd left, I trudged over, and the kit bag was quite heavy. I hauled that back, and then I went back and got the chute and folded it up. And so I opened up the kit bag and I thought, I wonder what goodies I got. Well, the first thing I came across was a Luger pistol and ammunition. And I usually carried an automatic with me, but I'd forgotten it that morning. And I thought I was a little bit further west in uncontrolled territory, which is cannibal country. So I thought, you better learn how to load this Luger and fire it. So I learnt that the hard way. Anyway, then I delved down further and I came got more tins of water. Terrific. And down further I came old wartime K rations, 3 meals in a tin, each meal wrapped in heavy greaseproof paper, and the taste of that greaseproof had gone through everything, even the little tins of camp pie. I thought I was hungry, but I wasn't that hungry. I'd settled for the condensed milk with barley sugar. Anyway, and then delving down a bit further, I found a bottle of rum. Now you're talking. So just then I looked up, and round the corner were coming about 50 natives, armed with bows, arrows and spears and axes. And so I put the Luger in my pocket because I wasn't quite certain where I was. Anyway, the front ones were smiling, and so I smiled back, and I think I shook hands with all of them. And they were pidgin speaking, and they wanted me to go back to their village, and I said, no, I'll stay with the aircraft because the ground party knows where to look for me now. Well, he thought he did. The ground party, the young patrol officer, Drake, was dropped a map with a circle on it, and when he worked it out, it covered about 200 square miles. And it just said, proceed to the scene of the crash. No more information than that. So he thought, I'll head off in the direction I think it's going to be and try and find out from natives along the way where it is. Anyway, two of the natives said they'd stay with me and sleep at the tail of the aircraft so that if the river rose they could wake me and get me out of the aircraft. Anyway, about 2 o'clock in the morning I heard shots, and I thought, well, that's the patrol officer coming. So I replied with the Luger, but I was in a pocket where no sound got out of. This is why the natives hadn't realised I was there. Anyway, shortly afterwards, a couple of hurricane lanterns appeared round the corner with the patrol officer and his line of police boys, and so we introduced ourselves to one another, and I said, Jock, would you like a rum? And he said, good God, I walked for 8 bloody hours in the jungle. I find a white woman in the middle of the jungle and she offers me a rum. You bloody beauty. So we sat under the wing of the aircraft and drank rum out of pannikins. I didn't feel any of those stones that night. Anyway, the next day we spent, or his labour line spent clearing the bank to lift the aircraft up onto the bank in case the river flooded, because I knew that an engineer would be walking into it in the near future. So, and we got prepared to walk out again, which I walked out to Drake on the Friday, I landed there on the Monday, and the Catholic bishop in QVAG, he had a Cessna, and he came into Drake-Care and picked me up and took me back to QVAG. He was so excited, he said, I've forgotten to put the dual in, Pat. He said, DCA asked me to come to Drake-Care. It was a no-no before, he wasn't allowed, he just used to sneak in there. But he said, I forgot to put the dual in, oh, I'm sorry. Most apologetic. Anyway, we survived. And an engineer in line did walk into KSK and dismantled it, carried that out to Lumi and put a new leg on it and a new prop and spliced some timber into the main spar and flew it home. And I have flown it again in New Guinea, and I think I bent it the right way because it was much easier to trim. So we excuse me, I've got to. So we just settled down to flying in QVAG, and we flew. We worked hard and we played hard. We flew every day of the week, and we flew Christmas Day if there were parcels for outstations. There were children at an outstation. We thought, well, Santa Claus has to get there. But it was a load of fun. I loved every minute of it. Later that year we decided to go on leave, which we did, and when we got back we found that Bob had put in another manager in QVAG, and he wanted Col and I to start a branch in Madang, but he didn't have a house for us. So we decided. Yeah. Yes, we'd got married when all these engine failures were going on. We didn't have any aircraft to fly, so we filled in time by going getting married. But yes, so he had no house for us in Madang, so we said, well, we'll take unpaid leave and go into the Highlands and stay with some friends who were just starting a coffee plantation. And we thought, well, we'll have a look around that, because that's what we ultimately wanted to do when we finished with the flying. And so that's what we did. But we wanted to go to Madang at one stage, and we found out that Bob had said that it told all the pilots no one was to let me on an aircraft because my licence was due for renewal, and he wanted me to lose my licence, and then he could say, well, you know, you're unemployable now, you haven't got a current licence. Anyway, this went on, and he wouldn't talk to us at all, so eventually it got too much for us, and Cole sent a telegram, and in those days your telegrams came over the wireless, everyone could hear them. He said, to Gibbsy, your evasive tactics intolerable, suggest you visit taxidermist, consider this our resignation. It's Col and Pat. So, and that's how we became coffee planters. But Bob was trying to square off with us at one stage, and he suggested that we have a free trip to Australia in the Yunker to square off with us a bit. Anyway, he said if you can get yourselves into Kuroga, you can go south on the Yunker, which we did. And at this stage we had our first child, who was about 11 months old, and just before we took off, Bob said, Pat, you don't mind acting as hostie, do you? I said, now just a minute, Gibbsy, have you got paying passengers on this flight? Yes. I said, how many? He said, 14. I said, and what have I got to serve them with? He said, oh, you've got a 2-cup immersion heater. I said, oh, that's terrific, thank you. So anyway, I managed to cope with that. And then about 20 minutes out of Horn Island, we lost an engine. And Cole was sitting on the arm of my chair at this stage, and he said, what was that? I said, that engine just seized. He said, oh, that's nice. And we had the chief engineer on board, and he scuttled down the back, and there was a loo at the back, but it just had a Hessian drop as a door. And the stupid Eric Cross he went in there and he started to in-flight the life raft. You know, we're still 20 minutes out of Horn Island, and there's this life raft billowing out of the toilet. And we thought, he's panicking. The wrong engine's packed up. Anyway, we managed to land on the two engines, and we saw him afterwards. And we saw Eric afterwards, and we said, the wrong engine pack up. He said, yes, I was expecting the other one to. Now, Gibbsy had put paying passengers on this flight. He was incredible, that fellow. Anyway, we spent 4 days in Horn Island and eventually paid our own way to Australia. But then we spent 16 years in the Highlands growing coffee, and then we came back to Australia in '69, and because we still had the 3 children to educate. And Cole died in '94, and in '98 I got in Dorothy Herbert, Dr. Dorothy Herbert. She used to fly, and she was a foundation member of the Australian Women Pilots, and she had a practice at Charleville for 20 years, and she had her own aircraft out there. And she used to fly for the flying doctors, and then she became the doctor who flew. And Dorothy rang me up and said, there's an international conference on in New Zealand, I think we should go. So I went, and that was good. Dorothy and I did New Zealand. We drove all around the place. And then I met we shared a unit with another woman from Brisbane, Rhonda Tolk, who had a CPL and also a hot air balloon licence. So I started crewing for Rhonda when we came back, and I was flying with her one day, and she said to me, why don't you get your fixed wing back? And I said, oh, I couldn't bear to do those exams again. She said, you don't have to. So I took myself off to Archerfield to Arena Aviation and met Gordon Bradbury, and he took me over to CASA and with my logbook, and the young man said, what's your computer number? I said, dear boy, they hadn't even invented them when I was flying. And he said, well, you've got to have a computer number. I said, well, you give me a computer number and then I'll have one. So he told me to go away for a quarter of an hour. I said to Gordon, he's put me in the too hard file. Anyway, I went back a quarter of an hour later, and he had crossed out my old number and put a computer number in. And I said, well, right, now what do I do? He said, well, I said to Gordon, what do I do now? He said, go and have your medical and prove to me you can fly. But the young man said to me, there's so many pilots that give their eye teeth for a licence like this. It's the old-fashioned hard-backed one. And
So what year is this time?
that I started flying again,
What year?
98.
I got that.
Yeah, right.
I wasn't going to give it back.
No.
And it's a photographic licence too, so that's good.
Yes, it's got a photo, it's got my student pilot's licence, for everything. It's all there. And this terrible piece of plastic you get these days, it's shocking.
You moved beyond that, yeah?
Hmm?
Got another big one, similar to that, bigger nowadays.
Are they?
Yeah, I went back to a hard copy. Yeah, it's a bit bigger than that.
Oh, did they?
The current ones. Yeah.
Oh, well.
We had plastic ones for a little while.
Anyway, I said, well, what's so good about that? He said, it's antique. I said, well, that's what's it make me? Because I said, it's mine. So, with that, thank you very much for listening to me.
She was nicknamed the Superfly.
And how much flying did you do when you restarted?
Oh, I did enough to take my children flying and my grandchildren flying. I flew for a couple of years. I think I stopped in about 2002 or 3. But I was getting too old.
Never.
Oh well, there comes a time when you've got to admit it, whether you want to or not.
Got any more questions? Anybody want to ask Pat? This is a big chance. There's a few we're getting pilots here.
I noticed you mentioned the name of Eric Costa before.
Yeah.
It's strange, he's actually reasonably instrumental in a lot of the vintage
Is he?
aviation area because back in the 70s I started rebuilding the global.
Right.
And DCA then was on the opinion, which they said, no, don't you understand?
Yeah.
But Eric Cross was actually good. He actually managed to push with a couple of few others to get it through.
Oh, that's good.
Build these sort of things. Under your house and get an engineer to sign it out. So, yeah, I've had
Yeah.
dealing with Eric.
Yeah, well, he was the chief pilot for Gipps Sepik Airways while I was with them. But
He was a DCA home-built man, so he used to come
Oh,
check
right.
out your workshop, make sure you could glue two pieces and wood together.
right. Yeah, well, there was one incident, when I was flying up there, the top part of New Guinea was United Nations Trust Territory. My brother's 3 kids were born in Papua, they were automatically Australians. Mine were born on the other side and we had to make them Australians, give them a citizenship. However, United Nations found out at one stage that a woman was flying commercially in Papua New Guinea and they got a bit shirty about that and sent a rocket through to John Arthur, who was the chief DCA fellow in Moresby, to come through and tell me I couldn't fly solo over uncontrolled territory. And I said, well, that's ridiculous, John, because if I've got to take somebody else with me, if I come down in cannibal country, why give them 2 feeds instead of just 1? So anyway, I said, well, I can familiarise anyone with the Sepik, a new pilot. We left it at that, and he went away happy, and I just kept flying over uncontrolled territory. But,
You ever come across Peter Broadhurst up at Arthur? He was the first patrol officer up in that area. Peter and Helen Broadhurst. They
no,
were based in Idaho, I believe.
were they? What year are you talking about?
About that same period, I think, because I knew them well in Mackay. They
Yeah,
used to always talk about Ideby and
and
all those trips
Tadji,
up there.
Tadji was the airstrip, yeah.
But Helen said she was the first white woman most of them had ever seen up there.
Yeah. I was,
He was the first patrol officer for that
right,
area.
yeah. I can't remember, but I may have met them.
Yeah, and you don't worry about the name, or you're the guy in a grey uniform.
Yeah,
on our side.
yeah. That's right, like the young Jock McGregor who walked into me. I hadn't met him before, although he'd been at Draker Care for a couple of years. But he gradually got to know them. But Bill Royal, one of the big 6 from the gold mines in Wow, he was one of the big 6 that found that alluvial gold that was... They had so much of it, they didn't know what to do with it. They tied up the legs of their pants and filled the legs with gold because they had no containers. Anyway, Bill was retired at just out of Marprick, and he said to me, he was on the council in the Sepik, and he said, are you having any trouble with people flying with your pack? And I said, not really, Bill. But he said, well, I'll make sure you don't, because he said, I'll ask for you to come and get me every time we have to have a council meeting in Wee, and which he did, which was great. He was a delightful fellow. Anyway, here we are.
Well, any more questions? Where's our Vice President run off to? Oh, there he is. I'd like to ask our Vice President to come up to the front. He's got a small thing.
Yeah, for everybody that doesn't know me, I'm Craig Thompson, and it is my honour to bestow upon you, Pat, an honorary membership to QVAG and the AFM. for your exploits
Oh,
and your adventures. There's a better word for that, and I can't think of it at the moment, in aviation. And that's not only as a woman, but as a pilot.
thank you.
Thank you.
I've just paid my membership.
Oh, there you go.